Today, we're diving into something pretty dark. We're looking at a time in history when punishment wasn't just a consequence, it was a public show, a piece of state-sponsored theater. And this isn't just about the gory details. It's about trying to understand the brutal logic that shaped how people lived for hundreds of years. So let's get into it.
So, you gotta ask, right? Why? Why all the elaborate cruelty, the public stages, the cheering crowds? Were people just more bloodthirsty back then? Or was there actually a reason for it all? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is complicated, but it all boils down to one powerful idea.
And here it is. Punishment was communication. It was a terrifying public service announcement, a political performance where the people in power showed everyone what happens when you step out of line. Every scream, every broken bone, it was all part of a very deliberate script.
Okay, so one of the main goals of this painful script was interrogation. See, back then, before we had things like DNA and forensics, there was this really flawed idea that you could literally squeeze the truth out of someone's body, that if you inflicted enough pain, a person just couldn't lie anymore.
And the most infamous tool for this was, of course, the rack. It was designed to systematically pull a person's joints apart. They'd tie your wrists and ankles to rollers, and then they'd just start cranking. The strain would pop your shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows right out of their sockets. And the goal? To get a confession, no matter the cost.
But the truth they were looking for was usually just whatever the torturers wanted to hear. Take the absolutely heartbreaking story of Anne Askew. She was only 25 years old when she was put on the rack in the Tower of London, not for a crime, but for her religious beliefs. They wanted her to name the other woman in her prayer group, and she refused. The torture was so brutal it left her completely paralyzed. She couldn't even walk to her own execution. They had to carry her there on a chair, where she was burned alive. It just shows you the horrific cost of trying to find truth through pain.
Beyond getting confessions, though, the real show was out in the public square. Here, it wasn't about the individual anymore. It was all about the audience. It was a spectacle of power designed as a terrifying warning to every single person watching. This is what happens when you defy us. And you know, different cultures have their own specialties. This slide gives a pretty grim comparison. On one side, you have gibbeting, which was big in places like England. The goal there was a long-term warning. You'd lock a body in a cage and just leave it to rot for years. On the other side, you have impalement. That was more about short-term, gut-wrenching terror. A body on a stake would create maximum shock, and then usually it was taken down the next day. And that whole long-term thing with gibbeting, it was an assault on all the senses. People who lived nearby would complain for years about the stench. I mean, there are reports of bodies being left in those cages for over 20 years. They became these horrifying landmarks, just a permanent rotting part of the scenery. Now, over in South and Southeast Asia, rulers found a way to combine an execution with a display of almost godlike control. Crushing by elephant wasn't just about killing someone. It was a way for a ruler to say, "Look at me. I'm so powerful, I can command the largest animal on land to be my executioner." And for some rulers, like the fourth Mughal emperor, it was literally entertainment. He supposedly ordered a mass execution by elephant just because he was bored. And the whole process, as you can see here, was pure theater. They'd place the victim, bring in the highly trained elephant, and have it slowly crush their limbs one by one before the final fatal blow. The slow, methodical process was the message. Even out at sea, where you don't have a town square, discipline had to be maintained with these brutal public displays. For sailors who stole or tried to mutiny, there was keel hauling. They'd tie you to a rope, throw you overboard, and drag you underneath the entire ship. You'd be drowning while also getting sliced to ribbons by all the sharp barnacles on the hull. It was a terrifying warning for everyone else on board. But then, there were some crimes considered so awful that a quick death just wasn't enough. For these, the goal was the complete and total annihilation of the person, not just their body, but their very humanity.
And maybe nothing illustrates this better than Scaphism from the ancient Persian Empire. The whole process is just systematically evil. You're tied up inside a boat. They force feed you milk and honey until you have uncontrollable diarrhea. Then they smear more honey all over you and set you adrift on a swampy lake. The filth and the sweetness attract swarms of insects, which start to eat you and burrow into your flesh while you're still alive. And they would keep feeding you every day just to prolong the agony.
So how long could this possibly go on? Well, one writer from the time documented a man who survived this living nightmare for an unimaginable 17 days.
17 days of being slowly eaten alive from the inside out.
The Romans had their own brand of bizarre symbolic cruelty. For the crime of murdering a parent, they came up with something called the penalty of the sack. The person was sewn into a leather bag, but not alone. They were sealed in there with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Then the whole bag was thrown into a river. The horror wasn't just drowning. It was spending your last moments in the dark with a bunch of terrified, frantic animals, a symbolic chaos to match the awfulness of the crime.
And then there's what might be the most psychologically terrifying punishment of all, the oubliette. The name comes from the French word to forget, because that's what happened. You weren't executed, you were just discarded, dropped into a deep cell, often on top of the bodies of the people who came before you, and simply left there to be forgotten by the world, slowly dying of hunger or thirst. And if you think that sounds like something out of a horror movie, it's not. It was very real. During renovations at Leap Castle in Ireland back in 1900, workers found a hidden oubliette, and the sheer number of skeletons they pulled out of it, it took multiple cartloads to clear them all. That's a horrifyingly real measure of just how many souls were forgotten down there.
So what's the lesson in all this? Why don't we see things like this in our public squares today? Well, over the centuries, there was a huge shift in how society deals with people who break the rules.
If you look at this timeline, you can see a really clear path. We went from the medieval focus on public pain as a show to the 18th century's public death as a warning. And then something changed. We saw the rise of the modern prison system. Punishment moved off the streets and behind walls.
And that's really the fundamental change right there. We traded the loud public spectacle of physical pain for the quiet, hidden silence of the cell. The goal isn't to make a statement with someone's body anymore. It's to just remove them from society. And that leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. This whole evolution from public agony to private prisons, it definitely seems like progress, right? But as our punishments moved behind walls, out of sight and out of mind, are we actually more humane, or did we just get better at hiding the agony we inflict? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.